Ancient Egypt is without doubt the most important civilization that our planet has ever known. 4,500 years ago, in the early days of the Old Kingdom, the pharaohs and their builders erected the Great Pyramids and their mythical guardian.
If you stood in front of the Great Pyramid of Khufu and you know nothing about Egyptology, you will never believe that a human being could build it.
The constructions of the Giza Plateau are the first evidence of the incredible organization of Egyptian society. While working on these immense projects along the Nile, the Egyptians became masters in the art of irrigation, farming, building, and administration.
We know that during this time, Egypt was very wealthy. Everything was very well organized. There was a large labor force, and there was plenty of food to feed them. So clearly this was a time where things moved smoothly, swiftly, the country was economically solid, and the arts and crafts flourished.
Over 3,000 years, the Nile civilization brought the art of construction to its highest level, invented one of the first writing systems, and produced a culture that would leave an indelible mark on humankind.
At certain points in Egyptian history in the New Kingdom, it controlled all the land from Syria down into what is now Sudan. So it was a much bigger country.
Through investigation, some periods of this great history are now well understood by Egyptologists. But some grey areas remain, periods about which information is scarce and where there is still a great deal to be learned. In September 2020, an extremely rare discovery was revealed to the world.
The discovery of the Golden City is the most important discovery that happened in Egypt after Tutankhamun.
This is the heart of Egypt, opposite Luxor, formerly Thebes, on the west bank of the Nile. It's here that an excavation revealed secrets previously buried deep in the sand. An ancient city was uncovered. Its ruins had been incredibly well preserved.
This city was kept alive, like what you see, under the sand for 300 years, until we came to reveal the secrets of the sand.
We owe this discovery to the renowned Egyptologist Dr. Zahi Hawass. For decades, he has been exploring the dunes and rocks of Egypt, searching for the secrets hidden beneath them.
You know, major discoveries in Egypt actually happened by accident. This is one of them. No one really thought that this city could exist. And this is why the discovery of this city, it's a surprise. It was a lost city.
Dr. Hawass and his teams set about excavating the site and unearthing the remains that had been buried there.
Dr. Zahi Hawass and his team decided to explore this area properly, and there they found enormous remains of a city. It's divided into sections with sinusoidal walls, and you can see places where artisans used to make jewelry, pottery, bricks, grind grain. It was extraordinary.
As the excavations progressed, streets appeared and curiously shaped walls were revealed. The geometry is unusual, but very well thought out.
Why you have the serpentine walls? Look, it's a workshop. They can burn, they can cook, they can make bread, but the most important that this can protect them from wind, from heat, from anything. Then this was made for a reason, that each one could be a workshop for our artisans.
Around what seems to be a large central street, These small sinusoidal workshops protect the city. But moving towards the centre, distinct areas appear, specialising in leather tanning and the making of clothes, devotional objects and jewellery. The ruins of the buildings even reveal tools, jars, pottery and other vessels used in the past.
So it's like a moment frozen in time. It's a snapshot. It is a unique opportunity for Egyptologists to better understand the daily life as well as the technologies of ancient Egypt.
Actually, we know a lot about temples and tombs, but we know very little about the people who made this civilization. And this is why the city can tell us for the first time about the artisans, about the people who made this great civilization.
These ruins are all the more precious as they tell us about one of the greatest golden ages Egypt has ever known. So great, in fact, that this metropolis emerging from the sands has been named the Golden City.
This Golden City is related to Amenhotep III, who was one of Egypt's great rulers of the New Kingdom. And we know this because there are a lot of inscribed objects mentioning this king's name. And also it is located in sort of Malkata area. So it's basically between his funerary temple and his great Hebsed palace and complex. So we know that it belonged to him because all of that land had been developed by him initially.
Amenhotep III was the 9th pharaoh of the 18th dynasty, a lineage of legendary pharaohs who united Upper and Lower Egypt. His reign began in the 14th century BC, more than 1,000 years after the pyramids were built. He is considered one of the greatest builders of ancient Egypt, the embodiment of Egyptian power and splendour, and the pinnacle of artistic achievement.
In fact, you can liken him to Louis XIV because he was a great statesman, diplomat, and also a lover of the arts. So Egypt prospered during his reign.
The Golden City was certainly the place where the most skilled craftsmen of the day created the finest foods, objects, and artifacts of the time.
This is the time of the golden age of Amenhotep III. The time when the artisans produce the major artifacts for the glory of that king.
Near the workshop areas, thousands of earthenware pots have been found and stored. These probably contained offerings celebrating the pharaoh's greatness. And yet, in the midst of this golden age, certain clues point to a more troubled time to come. As in Pompeii, signs of the site's occupation come to an abrupt halt. Something happened to make time stand still. Around 1352 BC, after reigning for 38 years, Amenhotep III died. His son took the throne and succeeded him as Amenhotep IV. This young pharaoh was about to become one of the most controversial rulers in Egyptian history. As we retrace the course of his reign, we're about to discover the strange direction it was about to take.
What is very interesting about the texts that have been so far discovered from the Golden City is that they don't just have the name of Amenhotep III, but they also have the name of Amenhotep IV, his son. And it seems from the evidence that these two were co-rulers for a while, that Amenhotep III, in fact, had his son become a trainee king so he could learn what to do and how to be a statesman.
In the early days of his reign, the young king kept in line with tradition. He decided to mark his accession to the throne by turning to the other side of the Nile, Thebes on the eastern bank. Here, a spectacular temple was built. the religious complex of Karnak, the largest in the whole of the ancient world. Covering more than 2 square kilometers, it was extended over 2,000 years by successive pharaohs. Each ruler added temples, sanctuaries, courtyards, and monumental pylons. This colossal construction boasts an impressive avenue of ram-headed sphinxes, a hall with 134 ornamental columns, and walls decorated with frescoes, each more spectacular than the last. It's here that we can see the first signs of Amenhotep IV. This vast religious complex is devoted to the cult of the god Amun, a local deity vital to the pharaohs of the 18th dynasty. Over time, Amun had become increasingly important in the Egyptian pantheon, to the point of being associated with Ra. He became Amun-Ra, a glorious sun god. The time had come for the young pharaoh to prove his loyalty to the powerful priesthood of Amun.
Il va prendre des engagements avec eux pour mettre en place un programme de financement des temples d'Amon et d'embellissement du temple d'Amon. Et on en a un témoin archéologique qui a été retrouvé, qui est sur l'entrée du temple d'Amon, où le jeune Amenhotep IV va donc programmer une amélioration de l'entrée en ajoutant sur l'avant de l'entrée une avant-porte qu'il va faire décorer, se représentant lui en train d'abattre les ennemis d'Amon sur l'entrée du temple.
Despite being perfectly in line with tradition, this monumental fresco 15 meters high points to the upheavals to come. Although it has now been reassembled outside the temple, at some time in the past it was deliberately obscured by a wall built by one of Amenhotep IV's successors, a surprising thing to do. Worse still, another scene, still in its original place in the complex, has obviously been scratched out and erased. Why was this damage done? What did Amenhotep IV do to incur the wrath of his successors? This is what the archaeologists have to discover. The first explanation is that Amenhotep IV decided not only to put a stop to the embellishment of the great temple of Amun, but at the same time to favor another deity. His heart was set on the god Ra-Horakhti, another solar deity, but brighter and more tangible, the midday sun at its zenith. Amenhotep IV ordered the construction of a temple and obelisk dedicated to the god within the Karnak complex. He was deliberately defying the priesthood of Amun and committing his first sacrilege.
Le choix de cette construction est totalement aberrant, puisque là, il va à l'encontre sans doute d'engagements qu'il avait pris, ou tout de moins de ce qu'il devrait faire. Donc là ça met en évidence qu'il y a une rupture énorme, qui est politiquement forte.
This new temple is located at the eastern end of the Karnak complex, the other side to the first embellishment projects he'd promised Amun and his clergy. But Amenhotep IV didn't stop there. He now decided to begin work on a new building, this time outside the walls of Karnak. An opportunity to go further, to take new religious liberties and make yet another provocative move.
Ce dieu ancestral, ils vont le faire bouger, ils vont le faire évoluer. Ils vont le faire évoluer dans son concept, en le centrant que sur le soleil, sur l'aspect physique du soleil. Et ces modifications-là vont modifier totalement le rôle de Pharaon dans l'espace religieux, dans la société égyptienne.
The idea of the historical deity Ra-Horakhti was gradually modified and pared down to establish a new cult. The new god became purely and simply the sun disk, flooding the world with his light. his almighty rays stretching out and terminating in his hands. He was now called Aten. Amenhotep IV gave Aten an increasingly important and to many heretical place.
Egypt had many gods, and when Amenhotep IV came to the throne, this was the case. But he chose to be something that is called a henotheist. He chose to prefer one god over the others, and in fact, he basically cancelled the chief god, Amun-Ra.
With this increasingly exclusive worship of the god Aten, the pharaoh was not only undermining the polytheist tradition of ancient Egypt, but attacking the existing religious powers head-on.
We think that there were probably a multiplicity of reasons for this. One could be that Amenhotep IV was a religious visionary, and he thought that this god Aten, who was the sun disk, had revealed himself to him and said, "You are my sun, you are my manifestation on earth." The other thing is that maybe it was a political move. Maybe because the priests of Amun had been gaining more and more and more power, Amenhotep IV wanted to take power back.
To consolidate his spiritual shift, Amenhotep IV changed his name. Since Amenhotep meant Amun is satisfied, he had to remove Amun from his identity. From then on, every trace of him that's been found refers to him as he who is beneficial to the Aten, the famous Akhenaten. The new cult of Aten would be very closely linked to the pharaoh himself, and his contemporaries were in for some surprises.
Il va devenir, lui, la preuve tangible de la divinité sur Terre. Il devient l'hypostase divine, et il remplace la statue de culte. Il devient une émanation divine.
To find out more, we have to look at the new temple that Akhenaten ordered to be built. This edifice would be the first great symbol of his religious revolution. But today, almost no trace of it remains. His successors methodically dismantled it. A new challenge for the scientists. Egyptologist Robert Vernier has set himself the task of bringing Akhenaten's key work back to life. One of his favorite tools is 3D reconstruction. He's created a research structure where engineers and scientists can work together to bring the past alive.
On est là vraiment pour faire le lien entre la pensée d'un chercheur, des chercheurs, arriver à la matérialiser, à la virtualiser, à la mettre dans l'ordinateur, à la mettre en 3D. Nous, on va essayer de questionner pour arriver à construire tout ça. C'est ça notre rôle.
Despite this powerful tool, a building that no longer exists, such as the Temple of Aten, can only be reconstructed on the basis of real evidence. Archaeological remains that have to be found in the field. In Karnak, Akhenaten's successors, who couldn't bear to see the god Amun offended, disassembled the temple stone by stone as soon as his reign was over. But paradoxically, the destruction of the building has proved to be advantageous to the modern-day archaeologists. The stones of the temple were later used for other constructions. And not just any constructions. They were used to fill the centers of the huge pylons found on the site. For thousands of years, these blocks of stone effectively lay hidden in plain sight. During the restoration of the 9th pylon of the Temple of Karnak, thousands of these blocks, known as talatats, were brought to light. The archaeologists discovered that they were decorated with mysterious engravings. Each one was obviously a fragment from a larger scene, a priceless resource.
c'est une source voilà, très importante, effectivement, parce que on a des représentations qui étaient sur ces talatats et qui se retrouvent dispatchées complètement. Et donc il faut, c'est une espèce d'énorme puzzle. Et donc quand on a réussi à restituer cette scène en entier, on a globalement la dimension du mur qui se met en place. Donc ça, c'est une aide à la restitution assez forte et spécifique un petit peu à Karnak.
The temple walls were completely covered with immense scenes. It was an incredible discovery. All the archaeologists had to do was reassemble the talatats, and the first walls of the structure would be recreated. Then it was time for 3D modeling to play its part. The temple was surrounded by a large square enclosure wall, each side measuring 400 cubits or 210 meters. The walls were 2.1 meters or 4 cubits thick. Once the perimeter had been outlined, the next step was to flesh out this reconstruction. The teams turned to previous archaeological finds, the new marks left on the ground by the temple. Their attention was drawn in particular to the corner of a wall where what seemed to be the remains of some pillars had been found. There were also parts of a statue of Akhenaten. The 3D restoration teams added pillars along the surrounding wall. These pillars would logically have supported a covered gallery, in front of which would have been statues.
La première hypothèse qui est développée depuis 30 ans, c'est qu'on a affaire à une galerie couverte sur piliers. Donc ça donne ça. Et quand on regarde bien les données archéologiques au sol, ça c'est la place exacte des piliers.
Est-ce que tu veux que je fasse apparaître les...
However, once assembled in 3 dimensions, this previously accepted theory no longer seemed to make sense.
En ayant le modèle 3D devant nous sur l'écran, tout de suite on voit qu'il y a un gros souci dans l'angle, puisqu'on se retrouve avec 2 piliers un peu décalés dans l'angle, alors que si on fait une galerie comme ça dans l'angle, on va mettre un seul pilier. Parce que si on en met 2, on est embêté pour mettre les plafonds, enfin, ça pose des gros problèmes techniques.
C'est vraiment ouvert comme format, donc je pense qu'il...
Then the researchers had an idea.
Les bases qu'on a ici, c'est pas les bases de piliers, ce sont les bases sur lesquelles étaient les statues. Et en fin de compte, c'est pas une galerie couverte sur piliers, c'est simplement un mur, et devant le mur, il y a toute une série de sculptures sur des socles. C'est pour ça qu'on en a 2 dans l'angle. On a les statues qui partent d'un côté et les statues de l'autre. Eh bien ça, on n'aurait pas eu le modèle, on ne pouvait pas arriver à cette conclusion.
In the light of this new analysis, the 3D reconstruction was modified. The ceilings were removed, and the bases, which were thought to have supported pillars, now supported the statues. This change may seem like a minor detail, but it's highly significant. Akhenaten was further immersing himself in his own radical personality cult, and had started to change the architectural norms of his time. This direction taken by the pharaoh was about to be confirmed by new clues. Once reconstructed, the scenes on the walls were surprising to archaeologists. Not only do they provide information about the size of the walls, but they also describe the structure of the whole building in precise detail.
So you can see the decoration, and in the decoration you can also see the plans for the temple. So this is a unique moment where we can actually see what a temple looked like without having the temple be there.
With an expert eye, it's possible to make out the position of the columns, staircases, and monumental doorways. This level of precision is unprecedented, and it's specific to the very nature of the cult of Aten. Under the sun's rays, everything that constitutes reality becomes sacred.
Ce qui est tout à fait incroyable, on va non seulement représenter le rituel, mais tout ce qui va avec, c'est-à-dire tout le fonctionnement du temple, alors qu'on n'a pas l'habitude de voir ça. Et là, on a une information précieuse qui nous arrive à travers ces blocs. Alors heureusement qu'on en a récupéré quelques milliers, parce que tout serait disparu, là, ça aurait été dramatique pour la compréhension de l'époque.
The archaeologists continue to assemble the talatats, reconstructing ever more scenes and learning more about the organization of the founding temple of the cult of Aten. This work enables us to visualize the temple's size, its pathways, doors, halls and sanctuaries. As the reconstruction of the frescoes progresses, one feature seems to recur with striking regularity. Each of the scenes is flooded by sunlight.
Ils vont installer les tables d'offrande. Au lieu de les installer dans un sanctuaire sombre, devant une statue de culte qui représente le soleil, ils vont installer la table d'offrande dans une cour, sous les rayons du soleil, et ils vont officier directement avec le dieu, puisque ce sont les rayons du soleil qui émanent de la divinité. Et ils ont le culot de faire ça. C'est-à-dire qu'à partir d'un moment, ils vont construire que des cours. Il n'y a plus de toit.
The very first temple dedicated to Aten finally takes shape before our eyes, and with it, a new style of architecture. Light lines without ceilings, breaking from tradition and making the construction process faster. A revolution in keeping with the speed of the changes that Akhenaten was imposing on society. On the strength of this first construction, he would be able to take his ambitions even further. Until now, during religious ceremonies, it had been customary to depict the pharaoh presenting himself to the god to whom he was paying homage. But with Aten, the god was no longer personified. He was reduced to the form of a sun disk, and facing him directly was no longer possible. From then on, in the depictions found by Egyptologists, the main subject of the scene is no longer the god, but rather the pharaoh under Aten's rays.
Donc c'est comme ça qu'il prend la place de la divinité. Pour faire simple, si vous voulez, avant, donc le pharaon va donner à boire symboliquement à la statue divine. Maintenant, c'est lui qui est sous les rayons du soleil et qui boit.
Then, what he did was people couldn't worship the Aten directly. They had to worship the king, who was the intercessor between Aten and the people. So really, what this was doing was seizing power for the king back again, like it had been a couple of thousand years before, when kings were really absolute rulers and totally viewed as gods on earth.
This change takes us towards a new shift in this ongoing spiritual revolution. As the king became a divine manifestation, so did his life. A new figure began to appear increasingly on the walls of buildings. A legendary queen, Nefertiti.
One of the most beautiful women from ancient Egypt, as seen in the modern day, was Nefertiti. She was the wife of King Akhenaten, and she is remarkable because in all of his imagery, she is shown very close to him. And she took things much further, and there was a much more sort of equal system. And maybe there was sort of the male and the female to create the entity as a whole, which was an idea that the ancient Egyptians royals had. But Akhenaten and Nefertiti really pushed the boundaries of this.
Nefertiti's political and religious role was so important that at some point she was undoubtedly elevated to the level of co-pharaoh, ensuring the regency of the kingdom alongside Akhenaten. The king and queen consolidated themselves in this almost divine role and nurtured a new ambition. Having established a new style of architecture and developed their own cult, they now wanted to liberate themselves once and for all from the existing religious power. Akhenaten set out in search of a new location in which to fulfill his spiritual and political vision. free of all constraints, his goal was to start from scratch and create an entirely new capital for Egypt. The pharaoh set his sights on Amarna, located halfway between Thebes, the religious capital, and Memphis, the historically political capital. This strategic choice, he claimed, was led by a divine vision of the sun setting in the distance between two mountains. The future city would be named Akenatan, the horizon of the Aten, the pharaoh's great project. To create a city in the middle of a desert, Akhenaten, Nefertiti, and their court would require the greatest talents in the kingdom. This decision, as surprising as it was ambitious, takes us back on the trail of the mysterious Golden City, recently discovered by Dr. Zahi Hawass. For archaeologists, the fate of this maze of workshops has now become clear.
One of the questions we have is, why is this Golden City such a snapshot in time? Why did people leave their pots? Why did they leave their grinders? Why are things looking as if someone's just about to come in? And one of the theories that people have is that maybe Akhenaten took over the throne and said, finished, we're moving to Amarna. Let's go.
The craftsmen would have been ordered to leave the site and start work on the pharaoh's project. A sudden exodus that finally explains its exceptional state of preservation.
If I close my eyes and I go back 3,000 years ago, I can really imagine that one day the overseer of the king's work, representing Akhenaten, came to the city. Workmen, artisans, leave. We go to Amarna with the king.
From now on, if the archaeologists want to follow the trail of Akhenaten's reign, they'll have to continue their investigations in the middle of the desert. The aim is to reveal what would have been the culmination of all the pharaoh's efforts. First of all, the researchers have to pinpoint the exact location of this new city.
He moved from Thebes and took his court to a place called Tel El Amarna. Now, he called it Aken, the horizon of the Aten. And we know all about this because he put up stele telling us what he had done and what his plans were for the city. And he said, I will build this and I will never leave it. And so indeed the city of Akhenaten was born.
These monumental stele not only outline the pharaoh's ambitions and intentions, they're interesting for another reason. They were arranged in such a way as to mark out the site. To date, 16 of these boundary stele have been found. They delineate a large territory covering 300 square kilometers, stretching around the Nile. However, in the middle of this area, all the buildings of the city seem to have disappeared. Once again, Akhenaten left few clues behind. To find out more about his great project, the archaeologists have to embark on another reconstruction challenge, but this time on the scale of an entire city. They begin by looking at the remains of the foundations. Luckily, more of them remain than in the Temple of Aten in Thebes, and they've been meticulously catalogued and analysed. These initial findings provide a ground plan of the city's main buildings.
On va partir des relevés qui ont été faits ou des traces archéologiques, enfin, d'un plan. Donc là, on va créer des volumes qui sont vraiment simplistes pour déjà poser les bases. Et à partir de ça, on va commencer à décortiquer des éléments différents et on va enrichir en fonction des sources.
The scientists succeed in recreating the first buildings of the city, which extend over 9 kilometers. It's possible to make out palaces, temples, and the homes of dignitaries, as well as more modest housing and also a craftsman's village, like the one found to the west of Thebes. It provides an ancient example of well-thought-out town planning.
Donc c'est pas une ville où des gens vont venir avec leur baluchon, dit tiens, une nouvelle ville, je vais m'installer. Donc là, tout ce qui arrive, c'est cadré. C'est cadré, c'est-à-dire qu'on a tous les proches du roi, tous ceux qui ont des fonctions, tous ceux qui sont opérationnels, ont des habitats à Amarna, plus tout le personnel, la police, tous les artisans, tous ceux qui travaillent aux constructions, on va leur faire des dortoirs, il y a des responsables, donc tout ça c'est organisé.
Some of the many buildings revealed seem more important than others. Palaces and temples that bear an uncanny resemblance to those built in Thebes. It's as if the first temple of the Aten in Karnak were a prototype. But trying to find out more about this emerging city presents new challenges. Unlike the constructions in Karnak, here there are no talatats decorated with descriptive frescoes, which are so specific to Akhenaten's buildings. Fortunately, the scientists can turn to evidence that is just as precious. To be found in the tombs scattered around the site.
Donc on n'a pas les parois des temples, mais on a les parois des tombes. Alors il faut se méfier quand on va chercher les interprétations, c'est que dans les tombes, c'est pas la vie du roi, c'est la vie de la personne qui va être enterrée là. Et donc la personne se fait représenter de façon valorisante dans sa fonction.
However subjective they may be, these images are an incredible source of information on the buildings of this lost city. Anyone able to read these frescoes will find that they contain complete plans of the buildings. The various architectural elements appear with astonishing clarity. For the archaeologists, it's finally possible to bring the legendary site of Amarna back to life. The different areas are defined and the city's epicenter takes shape. A great palace rises up with its outbuildings and ceremonial courtyards. It's surrounded by the small and great temples of Aten, the focus of a religion that was about to set the rhythm for life in this new capital. The grand design that Akhenaten had been working on since his accession to the throne of Egypt had finally become a reality. The cult of Aten was now firmly established in Egyptian society. But the revolution went further. Egyptologists have observed that it also had a major impact on the art of the time. The aim was to stick closely to reality, to honor the world that Aten was flooding with his light. Lines that were previously straight and rigid became more fluid, curved, and natural. The depictions of Akhenaten became increasingly sinuous and detailed.
He has an elongated skull, longish chin, very narrow face, high cheekbones, eyes slightly slanted like this, a very thin neck, stoopy shoulders, a big belly, big hips, big thighs, very thin calves and spindly hands and feet.
The depictions of Nefertiti also become increasingly detailed. In his workshop, the sculptor Thutmose produced a magnificent bust of the Queen, one of the greatest artistic masterpieces in the history of humankind. The art of Amarna is now considered a style in its own right.
On va aller sur une expression figurative, mais qui va chercher un peu le naturel dans tout ça, sur la façon de graver. Et ce qui fait que c'est tellement particulier que ça marque l'art égyptien. On sait quand on voit une représentation si elle est avant Amarna ou après Amarna.
Today, thanks to its instantly recognizable style, scientists are able to track down pieces made in Amarna's workshops scattered throughout the world's museums. One last chance to find out more about this city and the cultural revolution that shaped it. At the Akenatan Museum in Bordeaux, there are two sculpted heads that may well have been produced during Akhenaten's reign. They display the hallmarks of Armenian art, and the challenge is to find out who they represent. To shed light on the history and identity of these sculptures, 3D technology is once again proving invaluable. This time, it isn't about creation, but acquisition. Capturing what's there to create a highly detailed virtual model.
Allez, voilà, c'est bien.
Si.
Ah ouais, bien.
Donc du coup, il faut qu'on numérise l'avant, l'arrière, on met l'ensemble.
L'ensemble, il vaut mieux, si possible, en
très haute résolution.
Voilà, ça roule.
Très bien.
The scientists will take hundreds of pictures, making sure they document the tiniest details, which are sometimes the most interesting. These will allow the complexity of Akhenaten's reign to be explored in even greater depth.
Au niveau des modèles, il faut également avoir les cassures et donc peut-être d'anticiper sur des fragments qui sont peut-être dans les réserves à Karnak ou sur le musée du Caire.
Every angle and facet is covered. The images are then located in space. Once aligned with each other, they will form an incredibly precise digital model.
Ça va permettre d'avoir une vision différente aussi de celle qu'on a dans la réalité. Parce qu'on va pouvoir, par exemple, bouger un éclairage de manière complètement fausse. Donc, pour essayer de comprendre, on va pouvoir appliquer des filtres sur le modèle 3D pour essayer de faire apparaître des éléments ou des détails. Donc, ça permet de manipuler et de voir des choses qu'on ne verrait pas dans la réalité, en fait.
After it's been reworked and refined, this 3D model will be made available to the scientific community. Everyone will then be free to manipulate it, dissect it, and put forward their own theories. Even though a complete analysis will take a long time, these sculpted heads are already pointing us towards a crucial period, the last years of Akhenaten's reign. One of them may represent his young son, Tutankhaten, born in Amarna. When he was just 7 or 8 years old, his father died. Akhenaten was gone. He was only about 30. With him went his dreams and his vision of the world. When Tutankhaten took the throne after a short transitional regency, he was only 9 years old. This fragile succession was an unexpected opportunity for all the opponents of the revolution led by Akhenaten.
Akhenaten seemed to have created a lot of problems with his ideology. By closing down certain temples, it means that you have a lot of unhappy priests. You also have confused people, because how can you do this? How can you cancel off a god? Also, these temples had been places of wealth. What happened to the wealth? And also, Akhenaten was not really dealing well in diplomacy or anything else.
The members of the clergy and partisans of the former cult of Amun pressurized and manipulated the young heir in order to regain their power and restore a certain order. The new ruler was forced to return to Thebes, to the land of the god Amun, and changed his name. Tutankhaten became the pharaoh who would go down in history as Tutankhamun. In the years that followed, the drive for restoration would go even further. It was from this moment that Akhenaten came to be regarded as a heretic. His successors took steps to distance themselves from the whole Atenian adventure and did everything in their power to ensure that it was forgotten.
Ce qui va être dramatique pour la connaissance de la période, eh bien, c'est qu'ils vont démonter tout ce que le roi avait fait, quoi. Toutes les constructions dédiées à Aten sont systématiquement démontées. Alors c'est facilement démontable, c'est à la tâte, alors c'est facile. Les statues, ils sont cassées en 1000 morceaux pour réellement éradiquer toute trace d'Akhenaten sur la terre d'Égypte.
After a reign of almost 20 years, death was not the worst sentence for the man who had done everything to make his mark on history. After he died, he was condemned to oblivion by his successors. Akhenaten spent his life shaking up the codes of his time. Within just a few years, he challenged the clergy of Amun, invented a new cult, developed his own style of architecture, and established a new capital for Egypt. Today, thanks to all these discoveries, a new period of history is being revealed to us. We know so much more about the solar cult of Aten that it's now possible to revise the image of this heretic pharaoh.
In a way, what Akhenaten was doing was trying to go back to someone like the 4th dynasty, like King Khufu, where the power of the king was much more concrete and absolute.
More than 1,000 years before Akhenaten, the first pharaohs, the builders of the pyramids, already had one objective in mind: to become true gods and associate themselves with the sun. The idea was revived shortly before the reign of Akhenaten in the days of his father, the powerful Amenhotep III, whose golden age proved to be increasingly prosperous, ambitious, and luminous.
The most important thing that we have to understand that Akhenaten was the co-regent of his father. Then maybe his father taught him about Aten.
You can see an increase in solarization. You can see an increase in the divinization of the living king. So either Akhenaten was a religious visionary, or he was a politician, or a dangerous combination of the two.
3,300 years later, we are still rediscovering this very special time in Egyptian history. A period that saw a succession of legendary characters emerge within the space of just a few decades. 3 consecutive generations that each in their own way would change the face of the greatest civilization of all time.